This is Concept E classes, and today we will deal with Chapter 6 of Class 9 Science, Tissues. We will be covering this chapter in two parts. So in this video, we will see Part 1. So first we will see an introduction of tissues. Then we will discuss if plants and animals are made up of same types of tissues. And in this part, we will see some of the plant tissues. And in the next part, we will discuss about animal tissues. So in the last chapter, we studied that all living organisms are made up of cells, and organisms can either be unicellular or multicellular. In unicellular organisms, what was the process? A single cell performed all the basic functions. That is, one single cell is capable of performing several functions like respiration, digestion, etc. Let's take the case of amoeba. A single cell, it carries out the movement, intake of food, gaseous exchange and excretion. Whereas in multicellular organisms, there are millions of cells. Each cells are specialized to carry out specific functions, and each specialized function is taken up by different groups of cells. That is, there are different groups of cells that perform different function, and since each of these cells carry out only a particular function, they do it very efficiently. To understand this, let's take the case of a human being. In human beings, there are different types of cells like muscle cells, nerve cells, blood cells. The muscle cells, they contract and relax to cause movements. The nerve cells, they carry messages. The blood cells flows to transport oxygen, food, hormones and waste material. Similarly, in the case of plants, there are vascular tissues. They conduct the food and water from one part to another. So in multicellular organisms, there are a group of cells that perform different function, or we can say that it shows a division of labor. So the cells which are specialized in a function are grouped together. That is, a particular function is carried out by a cluster of cells. See, like a cluster of cells at a definite place in the body. See, there is a bone cells here. Here we have cartilage cells, connective cells. So this cluster of cells is called as tissue. See, you can see different types of tissues here. Tissues are arranged and designed so as to give the highest possible efficiency of function. Just like we said, these cells, they carry out only a particular function. So they do it very efficiently. So a group of cells that are similar in structure and they work together to achieve a particular function forms a tissue. So tissue is a group of cells that are similar in structure and work together to achieve a particular function. Some of the examples of tissues are blood, phloem and muscle cells. Now, are plants and animals made up of the same type of tissues? Let's see. No, they are not made of the same type of tissues. In plants, they don't move. They are stationary or fixed, and they contain tissues which are mostly the ones that provide support. So this supportive tissue generally have dead cells. Whereas animals, they move around in search of food, mates and shelters, and they consume more energy as compared to plants. Hence, most of the tissues in animals are living. Now, another difference between plants and animals is the pattern of growth. Now, the growth of the plants is limited to certain regions, whereas the cell growth in animal is more uniform. Now, there are some tissues in plants that keep on dividing throughout their life, and they are localized in certain regions. So based on this dividing capacity, plant tissues can be classified into meristematic and permanent tissue. We'll study more about this in the following slides. Whereas in the case of animals, there is no such borderline of dividing and non-dividing regions. Now, the structural organization of organs and organ system is far more specialized and localized in, and they are more complex in animals as compared to that of plants. That is mainly because of the mode of life. In plants are adapted to sedentary existence. That means they don't move a lot. Whereas in the case of animals, their mode of life includes active movement. So this mainly contribute to the difference in this complex organ system. So we can say that both plants and animals are not made of the same types of tissues. So let's study more about this plant tissue and animal tissue. So first let's deal about plant tissue. Now plant tissues can be classified into two types: meristematic tissue and permanent tissue. And permanent tissue is again subdivided into simple permanent tissue and complex permanent tissue. So let's discuss about each of these classifications briefly. So first let's study about meristematic tissue. Now you might have noticed the plants that tend to grow throughout their life. This is mainly because of some cells that keep on dividing. Now if you notice these plants, the growth of plants occur only in certain specific regions. This is because the dividing tissue known as the meristematic tissue is located at these points. So this meristematic tissue, it consists of undifferentiated, there's not many different cells which are capable of dividing, and the cells in the meristem, they can develop into other tissues and organs that occur in plants. Now these cells, they continue to divide until a time when they get differentiated and then they lose the ability to divide. Okay, so you just have to understand that this meristematic tissue is responsible for the growth in plants, and this meristematic tissues have cells which are continuously dividing, and the growth of the cells is limited to certain region. Now depending on the region where they are present, this meristematic tissues are classified as apical, lateral and intercalary. So let's see what is apical meristematic tissue, lateral meristematic tissue and intercalary meristematic tissue. First one is apical meristem. Now apical meristem is present at the growing tips of the stems and the root, and the cell division in this tissue leads to the elongation of the stems and the root. So this apical meristem increases the length of the stem and the root. In the case of intercalary meristem, it is seen in some plants which is located near the nodes. So this is actually present behind the apex. It is the part which is left behind by this apical meristem during the growth period. They are present at the base of the leaf and the internode regions where the branches sprout. Okay, so they actually lead to the increase in the length of the leaf, like the grass stem and all. So that is the function of intercalary meristem. Now in the case of lateral meristem, the girth of the stem or the root increases due to this lateral meristem. So it is present here along the sides of this longitudinal axis of the plant. It gives rise to the vascular tissue and it increases the circumference of the stem. Okay, and it carries the growth in the stem. See, thickness. So these are all the different types of meristematic tissue. Now let's see some of the characteristics of the cells present in the meristematic tissue. Now the cells of the meristematic tissue are very active. They have a dense cytoplasm, thin walls made up of cellulose, and they have a prominent or a very dense nuclei, and the intercellular spaces are absent inside the cells of a meristematic tissue. They lack vacuoles as well. So the cells, they have the capacity to divide themselves and form new tissues. Now let's study about the next type of plant tissue, which is the permanent tissue. Now what happens to the cells formed by the meristematic tissue? They take up a special role and lose the ability to divide. As a result, they form a permanent tissue. So this process of taking up a permanent shape, size and function is called as differentiation. What is differentiation? It is a process by which the cells of the meristematic tissue, they change themselves into permanent tissue by taking up a permanent shape, size and a function. Okay, and this differentiation leads to the development of various types of permanent tissue. So that's what we are going to see in the next slides. So before we enter into the detailed study of permanent tissue, let's take a quick review of the classification in permanent tissue. Now, permanent tissue are of two types: simple permanent tissue and complex permanent tissue. Again, we can subdivide the simple permanent tissue based on their function as supporting tissue and protective tissue. Now there are three types of supportive tissue that we're going to study, which is parenchyma, collenchyma and sclerenchyma. And protective tissue are of two types, epidermis and Cork cell. We'll be studying about two types of complex permanent tissues, which are xylem and phloem. So permanent tissues are of two types. So let's see the first type, which is simple permanent tissue. The tissues that are made up of one type of cells which look like each other are called as simple permanent tissue. So these all are simple permanent tissue. See, these tissues are made up of one type of cells and they are similar to each other. The cells of these tissues are structurally and functionally similar. One example of a simple permanent tissue is the layer beneath the epidermis. See, this layers, they're similar, right? This is a simple permanent tissue. So let's discuss about some of the simple permanent tissues. So the first simple permanent tissue that we're going to study is parenchyma. It is also a supporting tissue, that is, it supports the plant. Now parenchyma is the most common simple permanent tissue. See, this is the parenchyma. Okay, it consists of relatively unspecialized cells with very thin cell walls. See, this is a highly resolution image of parenchyma. Okay, so this parenchyma consists of cells with very thin cell walls. These cells all are living. They are living cells. They are loosely arranged and there are large spaces between the cells. That is, intercellular spaces are found in this tissue, and we can say that the cells are oval or spherical in structure as well. Now the main function of parenchyma is to store food. So parenchyma again can be subdivided into Chlorenchyma and aerenchyma. So first let's see about Chlorenchyma. The parenchyma tissue which contains chlorophyll and performs photosynthesis is called as Chlorenchyma. Typical parenchyma tissue doesn't contain chlorophyll, but in some situation it contains chlorophyll and it performs photosynthesis, and then it is called as Chlorenchyma. Now let's see about aerenchyma. In aquatic plants, large air cavities are present in the parenchyma to help them float. So such a parenchyma type is called as aerenchyma. So the parenchyma which contains large air spaces or air cavities are called as aerenchyma, and it helps the aquatic plants to float. Now the next simple permanent tissue that we are going to study is Collenchyma. This is also a supporting tissue. Now what is the function of this Collenchyma? It provides flexibility in plants. The flexibility in plants is due to this permanent tissue which is called as Collenchyma. It allows bending of various parts of plants like tendrils or stems or climbers. It also provides a mechanical support. So this is a living mechanical tissue. Now this tissue can be found in leaf stalks which below the epidermis. If you remember the slide that I've showed before, we can see that below the epidermis there is this Collenchyma and parenchyma. So this tissue is actually found below the epidermis in leaf. Now let's see the characteristics of the cells inside this tissue. The cells of this tissue are living, they are elongated, and they are irregularly thickened at the corners. See, this is a transverse section, that is, if we cut it horizontally, this is the section and this is the longitudinal section. Now if you observe the cells closely, we can see that they are irregular thickening at the corner, and they have very little intercellular space, and the main function of this Collenchyma is to provide flexibility in plants and to provide mechanical support. Now this is a real-time image of Collenchyma. Now the next simple permanent tissue is a Sclerenchyma. This is also a supporting tissue. Now the Sclerenchyma tissue makes the plant hard and stiff. For example, the husk of a coconut, it is made up of a sclerenchymatous tissue. Now let's see about the characteristics of the cells inside this tissue. All the cells in the Sclerenchyma tissue are dead. They are long and narrow as the walls are thickened due to lignin. So these all are Sclerenchyma. Now Sclerenchyma cells are of two types, sclerids and a fiber. Often these walls are so thick that there is no internal space between cells. That is, there is no intercellular space between these cells. The tissue is present in stems, around vascular bundles, in the veins of leaves, and the hard covering of seeds and nuts. And it provides strength to the plant parts. Okay, so the main function of Sclerenchyma is to provide strength to the plant parts. So let's now see about the next category that comes under the simple permanent tissue, which is the protective tissue. So till now we were studying about supporting tissues, that is the parenchyma, collenchyma, sclerenchyma. These all are simple permanent tissue that supports the plant. Now we are going to study about the simple permanent tissues that protect the plant. So the first protective tissue that we are going to study is epidermis. Now epidermis is usually made up of a single layer of cells around the plant body. See, you might have noticed even in the previous slide that we have seen a thin layer. This is the epidermis. Okay. In plants living in very dry habitats like in deserts, the epidermis may be thicker since the protection against water loss is critical. So the entire surface of the plant, it has an outer covering of epidermis, and this epidermis protect all parts of the plant. The epidermal cells on the aerial parts, it secretes a waxy water resistant layer which is called as cuticle on the outer surface. This cuticle, it aids in the protection against the loss of water. It protects the water loss through transpiration or evaporation or any type of mechanical injury or invasion by parasitic fungi. So in short, we can say that this epidermis protects all parts of the plant. Now let's see about the cells of the epidermal tissue. The cells of the epidermal tissue form a continuous layer without any intercellular spaces. They are often flat, relatively flat, and the outer and side walls are quite thicker than the inner wall. Other than this, if you observe the epidermis of a leaf, small pores can be seen here and there, and these pores are called as stomata. Okay, so the stomata are the small pores that can be seen on the epidermis of a leaf. So stomata are enclosed by two kidney-shaped cells called as guard cells. These two are guard cells. See, they are necessary for exchanging the gases with the atmosphere. Transpiration, there is a loss of water in the form of water vapor, also takes place through this stomata. Okay, so stomata are the small pores that can be seen on the top of the epidermis. They are guarded by two kidney-shaped cells called as the guard cells, and they are very important in exchanging gases with the atmosphere, and also the loss of water in the form of water vapor also takes place through this stomata. Now epidermis submerges in the roots. They have a function which is water absorption. They commonly have long hair-like parts that greatly increases the total absorptive surface. In some desert plants, this epidermis has a thick waxy coating of cutin, which is a chemical substance with a waterproof quality on its surface. Now let's study about the next protective tissue, which is the Cork cells. You might have noticed a branch of a tree and that of a stem. It is very different, right? The branch of a tree is quite hard, whereas if you take the outer layer of a stem, it's very soft and brittle. So why is that? That is mainly due to the Cork cells. As plants grow older, the outer protective tissue, it undergoes certain changes. A strip of the secondary meristem located in the cortex forms layers of cell which constitute the cork. So this is a protective tissue, and the strip of the cells which is located in the cortex, it forms layers of cell like this, see, and this is called as the cork cells. The cells of this cork are actually dead and they are compactly arranged without any intercellular spaces. So what are the characteristics of the cells present in a Cork tissue? The cells are dead cells and they are very closely arranged, that there is no intercellular spaces between them. They also have a substance called as suberin in their walls that make them impervious to gases and waters. So this suberin is present in this wall, okay, and they make this cell impermeable to any type of gases and water. They do not allow water or gases to pass through this layer. So this is another type of protective tissue. Now let's study about the next permanent tissue, which is a complex permanent tissue. So till now we were discussing about the tissues which were made up of one type of cells. And what was that type of tissue called? They were called as simple permanent tissue. Whereas complex tissues are made up of more than one type of cells. That is, the tissues which are made up of more than one type of cells are called as complex tissue. And all these cells, they coordinate to perform a common function. Xylem and phloem, they are the examples of such complex tissue. So this is the complex tissue. It consists of xylem, phloem, and these tissues are also called as vascular tissues. Now this vascular tissue is a very important feature for all the plants that survive in a terrestrial environment. Okay, they are both conducting tissues and they constitute a vascular bundle. That's why they are called as vascular tissues. So first let's see about xylem. Now xylem consists of four types of cells: the tracheids, the xylem vessels, the xylem parenchyma, and the xylem fibers or the xylem sclerenchyma. Okay, so let's see about each of these cells. The tracheids and vessels, which are the tracheids, this part, and the vessels, they both have thick walls and many are dead cells when they mature. They are tubular structures, both tracheids and vessels. The vessels are also tubular structures that are placed one over the another, and they form a channel for the efficient conduction of water. So tracheids and vessels, they allow to transport water and minerals vertically. Now the parenchyma, xylem parenchyma, they stores food, and the xylem fibers or the xylem sclerenchyma, they are mainly supportive in function. That is, they contain non-living fibers with thick walls that provide mechanical support. Okay, so the main function of xylem is to transport water and nutrients from the roots to upper parts of the plant, to provide mechanical support and to store food as well. Now let's see about the next complex permanent tissue, which is the phloem. Now phloem is also made up of 5 types of cell: sieve tubes, phloem fibers, companion cells, phloem parenchyma. Now the sieve tubes are tubular cells with perforated walls. The sieve tubes are made up of elongated, thin walled cells placed end to end. They contain many pores which are also called as sieve plates. Okay, now we have phloem parenchyma. This actually stores food, and the companion cell, they have a dense cytoplasm and they serve cells, and companion cells are called as sister cells. Okay, and this phloem's main function is to transport food from leaves to other parts of the plant. Except for phloem fibers, other phloem cells all are living cells. So that's all about plant tissues. We'll discuss about animal tissues in the next part. Tune in soon for the next section. Thank you so much. May God bless you all. Till then, stay safe. Take care. Bye-bye.